into the Egyptian mystery school of Akhenaten and the Law of One. This is the symbol for that school. Though they wouldn't let me draw the symbol exactly as it should be, and if to do it properly, the area inside of this circle should be gold. It's actually the right eye of Horus on the surface of its solar disk, which was the symbol for their religion. Now, it begins in this way. Both the Christian and the Egyptian religions have certain things in common, like I said. They have another thing in common having to do with creation itself. Both of these religions believe that everything came from nothing. I'll read they believe that it came from the void, the great void. The Christians call it the great void, or just the void, whereas the Egyptians called it the duat. I'm going to take my glasses off here. Chapter 1, this is of Genesis. I'm just going to read the first three sentences, or three numbers, rather, of chapter 1. And it says, "In the beginning God created the heaven and the earth." So, we don't know who God is, but that's who created the heaven and the earth. Number 2, "And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters." And immediately after that, number 3, it says, "And God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light." There's a statement in, first of all, you see that in the beginning the earth was void and without form. There's nothing. Voidness is nothing. And then the next thing that happened is the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, or the deep. And then this movement, immediately after the movement, he said, "Let there be light." Well, from an Egyptian point of view, this is a very simplified version of their belief. And that there is something missing in this belief, which from a physicist's point of view would absolutely have to be there, otherwise this could not take place. This is impossible, absolutely impossible from a physical point of view, in the sense that if you have, again, there's 144 different kinds of voidness, but in 3D space, like we're in, voidness simply means space with nothing in it, no thing, no molecules, no light, no anything at all. Well, if you were in 3D space, imagine yourself being in deep, deep space, and, okay, you got a body, you can keep that much, but nothing else. And it's infinite, below you, above you, behind you, all the way around, just infinite forever nothingness. And then you decided to move. First thing he did was God moved on the face of the water. So you're going to move. How can you move? How is that possible? If you're going to move from here to over there, how do you know you did it? Or if you turned around, how do you know you turned around? In physics, movement, kinetic energy, requires 2 points. It requires something to move relative to. There has to be something else first before movement's possible. You've got to have something here. If you got something here, then you can move relative to it. You can move around it. You can rotate relative to it, everything else. But if there is only 1 point, movement or kinetic energy is impossible. It has no meaning, no definition. There's no way for it to be determined. The Egyptians, in their understanding of the same thing, say that there is a step in between there. And so their training is this. They also believe that the great void, or the duat, is the source of all things, and that the only thing that is required in the great void is spirit. Just spirit and nothingness, and that is the source of all things. And they also believe that it is the movement of spirit that creates the worlds. But they have a step in the middle, and this is what they do. They believe that spirit contains within it, within spirit, not talking about body, just spirit, contains within itself, or consciousness, however you want to look at it, contains within it the key to getting out of or beginning the process of movement from the great void. And that key has to do with the directions, the sacred directions of the American Indians, the east, west, south, north, etc., or the sacred directions of the Kabbalah, of the east, west, north, south, up and down, of the four angels of Michael and Gabriel and Raphael and Ariel and Metatron. These directions, these are very, very sacred directions. And for many people, you might think, well, so what? I mean, what does directions have? What is so important about directions? Well, when you're getting out of the great void, they're really important. And if you were to walk down this hallway, and the hallway was dark, but just say real dimly lit, and you could barely see in there, and you came into this room, which was absolutely black. You came up to the double doors over there, and you could just barely see the outline of the door, but you couldn't see inside there at all. You could walk up to that doorway and just step in just a little bit, and now you're in this total darkness. And we all have this innate ability to project a certain distance into the darkness. We can, without using our hands or anything, we can just kind of sense or feel if there's anything directly in front of us for a certain distance. It may only be an inch. Maybe it's 2 or 3 inches. Maybe it's a foot. Or maybe it's 3 feet or more. Everybody's different. There's a certain distance you can go, and you just know nothing's there. And you keep going, and all of a sudden your knowing quits. You're not sure anymore, and you can't go any further. You don't know if there's anything there or not. And so you've got this little line, or this projection line that will go out into the void a certain distance. That is the essential element of consciousness that begins the process according to the Egyptians. And we have that in 6 directions. We have it in front, and it's the same distance in all 6 directions. Our ability to project into the voidness is equal in all directions. We can't go further to the left than we can to the right. And so we can project whatever that projection is in front of us, we'll find that we can do the same distance to the sides, to the back, and above us, and front of and below us, if we're thinking of ourselves as just a spirit. And if you want to think of that, you can think of yourself as a round sphere, maybe, when you're spirit, that you really have no form. You have this, so you get these 6 little beams that come out a certain distance. Once, so the training in Egypt was as they would get them used to projecting these beams out. Once they projected these beams, and they would get them to project them out a certain distance, and the distance was 27.5 feet, approximately. They chose that because that's the outer rim of your energy fields. And so they'd have you project a beam out 27.5 feet in each direction. You'd learn until you could do that. They would train you. You can get these 6 little beams going out. And then you've got 2 going this way, and you've got 2 going that way, and you've got 2 going this way. Okay, you all got the directions clear. So you got these form a square around you, right? If you were to see them from above, here's the person. This is looking. You'd have one going out this way, one going that way, one going this way, and one going that way, and then of course one going this way. So these are the 4 that are around you this way. They would then have the person project those beams out, those 27.5 feet approximately, and then they would have them connect them together like this. forming this flat square or diamond around them. And then they would, from these four corners, they would run these beams up to the top one and form a pyramid around them. And then they would run the beams down and form a pyramid facing down below them. By the way, most of the pyramids in Egypt have a pyramid going in the earth as well as above the earth, centered right on the earth. They're inside as well. Even the Great Pyramid has a great crystal. Crystal. See if to form that pattern going down. So they form these two pyramids, which is called an octahedron, which looks like this. You can see it from the. This is the square, the flat plane that will be around us. So this is the front. This is the back. This is the left, the right, and the up and the down. They form this shape around their body. These two back-to-back pyramids. And so they go into the Great Void and they form these two big pyramids. They're 27.5 feet. They're 55 feet across. In there, they form these things around them. Okay, that's the first step they do before they do anything. Well, once they've created this, and it's just mental patterns. It's nothing, right? Just mental patterns. But once the form has been created around the spirit, kinetic energy or movement is now possible. The little spirit could come outside and rotate around this thing and come down here and move over here, or it could rotate inside of it, or it could sit still and rotate this. There's lots of possibilities that can be there. And these possibilities were without it. There's nothing. There's no way to move because there's no way to know if motion's taking place. But with it, motion's completely possible. Does everybody understand that? Any problem with that? Okay. So now there are other ways that this could take place, but this is the way that this particular school gave the training. They have to proceed in one way or another, and this is the way they proceeded. So this isn't the only way that one can proceed from here. In fact, there is some other real interesting ways that this could be done, but this is what they were taught. They were then taught to rotate, as they sat still, they were then taught to rotate the entire thing like this. It didn't matter. It didn't matter if they went forward or backwards. Just in other words, you're using this axis, and so you're rotating either forward or back like that. Then you would switch to the front-back axis and rotate either to the left or to the right. Doesn't matter. And then go to the top axis and rotate either to the left or to the right. Doesn't matter from that way. Now, what that does is it traces the parameters of a sphere. And you have a perfect sphere if you rotate all these through all the different patterns. And so you now have this sphere around you. And once they get the sphere around them, they're then told to drop this image. And so they drop this, and they go to, and I wish I had one, but I don't have one. They go to a perfect little sphere. I do have a little one. It's very little. So they go to a sphere. The reason they switch from the sphere, from the octahedron, it's called an octahedron, that form is, to a sphere, is that the movements are easier and less complicated. The movements that they're going to make afterwards to create the reality. Though the reality could be created through angles, it's easier to do it through a sphericalness. Now, another thing that I need to just bring up here real quickly, a point, is that there are two kinds of lines in sacred geometry. One is called male, and the other is called female. A male line is any line that is straight. That's a male line. Any line that is not straight is female, no matter what it is, if it's curved. In other words, this is a female line. That's a female line. And the most female of all female lines is a circle. And the most female of all female shapes is a sphere. And so also in the belief of the Christian Bible is that first there was Adam was created, and then Eve. And Eve was created from Adam. Male came first, female created from that. And the Egyptian belief, only in terms of geometrical things, is that the male form was created first. It was purely straight lines. And then the female form created from it was created second. So here's this little spirit now inside of this big round sphere, and he's sitting right in the center of it, he or she. Spirit's not really male or female. So the spirit is sitting inside of the sphere. Well, spirit could sit there forever. There's really no time at this point. Time doesn't exist. Time didn't actually exist at all until that was created. Until the octahedron was created. You have to have something. There has to be something to have a continuum. Time is not, there's no such thing as time. There's only continuum of space. Time is a mental thing that we've created up. What are you going to do with time? Where are you going to get it? Where is it? What is it? It's nothing. It doesn't exist. It's nothing at all. All there is the continuum of an object continuing through time, what we call. But time doesn't exist. It's just the continuum of space is all there is. And so once the object was created, then time, what we, as our mind thinks of it, was also simultaneously created. So the little person could sit inside this big sphere for a long, long, long time until finally he says, or he or she says, I think I'll do something. And there is one very specific thing that could be done that would be unique. I guess there's a lot of unique things you could do, but there's one. The training was, let's put it this way, the training is that you're to, once you create the sphere, you go to that which was newly created. That was the instructions. That's always the instructions, is to go to the new thing that was created. Well, what is it that was new that was created? The membrane. There's now an inside and an outside, and there's this membrane of the sphere that separates those two, and that is different than anything else that's in the entire universe. And so where you're instructed to go to is to the membrane, to the surface of the sphere. You can't make a mistake. It doesn't make any difference where you go on the sphere. You can go down, up, and it doesn't make any difference how you get there. You can curve over there, make a straight line, or meander sideways, or whatever you want. But you get there, and when you get to the surface, now you're now in position, and at that point, you only know how to do one thing. That's the limit of your memory at this point, and that is to, you know how to do two things, an octahedron or a sphere, but you're switched to sphericalness now. And so you move up to the surface of the sphere, somewhere on it, at which point you make another sphere. And you only know how to make one size sphere. You don't even know how to make two sizes. You only know how to make one size. So you make another sphere exactly the same as this one. Here's your first sphere. And let's say that you moved up here to the top. I'm going to choose that spot because it's more convenient, but it doesn't really matter. You moved right here. And you make another sphere. Well, the other sphere is going to be such that this is going to be the center of it. And so it creates a very sacred form in sacred geometry, and it's probably the most sacred of the sacred forms there are, just about. This little mouth shape in here. In other words, here's where you were, and here's the surface, and when you moved up to here, you created a sphere the same size, which causes the surface of that one to pass through where you were. So these two surfaces pass through the centers of these two circles. And this shape in here is called a vesica Pisces. And it is the creation pattern of things that, like the golden mean ratio and these kinds of things. That's what creates that. And we'll talk about it in a little bit. But this image that you see right here has a hidden image underneath it, which you will see later to be the image of light itself. It is the morphogenic structure of that which created light. Just the stuff that we've got falling in the room here right now. And what was the very next thing that God said after He made the first motion? He made the very first motion, and immediately He said, "Let there be light." He couldn't have done it the other way around and said, "Let there be light so I can see where I'm moving." He had to make this motion first to create this pattern, and once this pattern was created, he could say, "Let there be light," because it was through the pattern that light was created. And I'll be able to really show you this on a real hardcore science level in a little bit, though at this point it's too simple. You won't be able to get it from here because it's too simple. It's too obvious. Too easy. And so, but remember this, because we'll wait about 2 days down the line. I'll come back to this and I'll be able to show you what I'm talking about after we make it more complex. And now, at this point, now that he's made the circle up here, and I'll show you this on the slides here. Let me come to the slides. That's the Great Void. It was really the hardest drawing I ever did because I couldn't find a clean card. And that's the Great Void. And then inside the Great Void is the Spirit of God, which we'll use the symbol of the right eye of Horus. And then these, I did them all at once here. These are the 6 little beams coming out. And I didn't show the step of the octahedron forming or the spinning of it, but just that it forms a sphere. And then from that, the little right eye of Horus, the Spirit of God, ends up inside of this circle or this sphere, which is the symbol for the school. Now this is where the Spirit then makes a move from here to somewhere on the surface. Again, you can't make an error, but we will go to that spot. And it goes to there. And when it gets there, it only knows how to do one thing, and that is to make spheres. And so it makes another sphere, and you see the vesica Pisces is formed. And the gold one is the first circle that was formed, and this is the second one. Now, what does it do next? Well, it goes to that what was newly created. And there was only one thing that's new and different in the universe now, and that is the place where the two circles meet. If you think of two soap bubbles together, there's a circle around there. Not a sphere, a circle, where the two bubbles come together, which is that green line. So that green line is not just a line. If you were to look at it from above, looking down, you would see this. The gold and the black circle will, of course, coincide with each other, but the place that they meet would look like an inner circle. Does everybody get that? Anybody not get it? Okay. So this is the side view of it. This is the top view of it. Now in the side view, so the little spirit then goes down to that green ring. Doesn't make any difference where it goes. Can't make a mistake. Just goes somewhere onto the green ring. However, for our purposes, I'm going to choose this spot right here. No matter where you move, I can rotate that object so it looks like it's right there. Okay? Depends on the angle you're at. So I'm going to pick right there. And so it goes down to the green ring, and once it gets to that spot, it only knows how to do one thing, and that makes a sphere. of a certain size, and it does it, and it gets this. There are certain geometrical informations that are now present. An equilateral triangle is there, for example. There are two equilateral triangles, which is the basis of the golden mean rectangle. The logarithmic spiral is present. There's all kinds of very primary laws that are unfolding at this moment. This is on the second day. I didn't mention this to you. Do this if you want to, and I'm going to leave this up to you to do it if you want. But if you will look at what I'm about to tell you right now, and then read the Bible again, it will take on a whole new viewpoint you probably never ever thought about before. But there are 6 days of Genesis, 7 days of Genesis total. Each day has new things that are created each time, and you'll see some interesting things. This is the first motion from here to here. The first motion creates this black circle, and that's the first day of Genesis up here at the first motion. Okay, the second day of Genesis comes over to here. There's the first motion, first circle, second motion, second circle. This is the second day of Genesis. The first motion created light. The second motion creates various things. And if you want to correspond all these various attributes that are created each time, it will all begin to make sense in a whole other way. You'll see the geometrical nature of this. And I think that at this point, I want to do something. I think I want to do this. Let me explain it very carefully, because there's a point that I want to make, and I think I can explain this point to you. Normally what I do is have you go out into deep space and go through this motion, where you create the big sphere, and then you literally move in space over to the surface. Not just words or something like that, but you do it in your meditation. You move over to the place, and you feel yourself moving, you come up to the place, and then you create another sphere. And then you look down, and you see this ring below you, and then you move down to the ring. And then you create another sphere, and take you that far. It's only that far. And at which point, when you're out there in that meditation, you're in deep space, and the room's gone and everything, then I tell you something. The reason why I have you to go through all that, which is that from here on out, you're going to start seeing a lot of geometrical forms. They're going to get more and more and more complex. And as they do, you may forget that what the source of all these forms were, which was coming out of the great void, and that it was spirit that was making these forms through its motions. And if you really, really, really want to understand what this is all about, especially if you study sacred geometry later, you must always remember that it's not just lines on a page, or circles, or squares, or tetrahedrons, or dodecahedrons, or whatever. It's not just lines or three-dimensional forms, but they're always maps. They're movements of how spirit moves in the great void. And so that's what I mean by the chromosomes are geometrical images, because they're really maps of how spirit has moved in the great void to create the world in a particular way. And each one creates a different consciousness. And consciousness simply is just a different interpretation, how you interpret it. It's like a lens that you look through at one object and interpret it. There's only one reality. The reality doesn't change, but there's different interpretations of the reality, how you perceive the reality and yourself within it. And so this is what I really want to emphasize at this point, is that it's all motion, it's movements, it's maps, it's not just lines and circles. As long as you can get that, then you'll have a much deeper understanding of what we're about to lead into. Now, the next thing is that no matter how the first two motions were made, like I said, you can't make a mistake. No matter where you go onto the circle, onto the sphere, no matter where you go onto the surface of this little sphere, no matter where you go onto that circle that joins the first two spheres together, the two bubbles, you happen to be making a perfect line around the equator. you found an equator on there. There's an infinite number of them. You located one of them, and you began to make a motion perfectly around a perfect equator. Not at an angle or off to one point or anything else like that, but precisely around the equator. And so it's a vortex motion that began starting from here, and you started making that motion exactly on the equator. And once the motion has began, then from then on in, you just follow your heart, kind of. You just keep making the motion to the equator. So you come from here, and you automatically move down to here, following the equator. The first two motions are a little different. The third motion, from then on out, you only have to do this same motion over and over and over again. The third day of Genesis comes down to here like this. On the fourth day of Genesis, you come to this spot here. There are over 900 Bibles in the world. 900 Bibles. In about 50% of them or so, it says that on the fourth day of Genesis, that exactly one half of creation was created. You can actually see it geometrically, because on the 1, 2, 3, fourth day of Genesis, half of the original circle was transversed. Half of creation was completed. It then goes to the fifth day of Genesis here, fifth motion, and finally to the sixth motion. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 motions. And on the sixth motion, this pattern is formed. And also, sort of a geometrical miracle takes place. And geometrically, what happens is the sixth circle comes back and completes exactly to the starting point with nothing left over at all. It is just perfect. And so on the sixth day of Genesis, they all say, all the Bibles say, that creation was completed on the sixth motion. And then it says, on the seventh motion, that he rested. He says on the seventh day, the seventh motion, he rested. Because on the sixth day it was done, but they're saying that there's really 7 circles. So the seventh motion back into the center again, there's no creation that takes place in that motion. It was finished really on the sixth one. And so this pattern we're going to call the Genesis pattern. And it is the pattern through which the entire reality was created. And I hope to make that clear to your logical mind, your left brain side of you, that this is true. You are also looking at what you're going to find now is that there are going to be vortex motions. There's going to be a continually rotating motion of spirit as it extends out of this pattern. And each time that spirit makes one complete vortex, a three-dimensional shape, for our world anyway, a three-dimensional shape that you can hold in your hand is created and formed. And that these three-dimensional shapes are the keys or the building blocks of the reality. And you're now looking at the first one. The very, very first three-dimensional shape is before your eyes in a very unusual way. In mathematics, this one circle with 6 around them is the minimum amount of lines that you can make to create what is called a tube torus. If you simply rotated that right now, you would get what is this. This is called a tube torus. It's like a donut. Nothing special. We all know donuts. But it is a totally unique shape. There is nothing else in the universe like this. Nothing that has the capabilities of what a tube torus has, or a torus. You could have a tube torus. This creates a tube torus. You can also have a torus which is a sphere that comes in like that, which is like the Earth. which has a magnetic field that comes into a torical one. But this pattern of 6 spheres around one creates a tube torus pattern. So these are spheres around here, with one sphere in the middle. However, the size of the hole in the middle, theoretically, is infinitely small in this pattern. Does everybody see how if you spun those 6 spheres, you would get one of these? You know. Okay, so what is this? Well, I didn't know what the heck it was either when I first got it, and I didn't know what I had. This is through the work of the angels at this time, not through Metatron. This is where this part here right now is coming out. This is 20-something years ago that I started doing this. And I studied this, and after a while, when I started teaching these things, about 7.5 years ago, I still didn't really know at that point what this was. And then one day, it started very soon after I started teaching this. I got a group of people from Hollywood that came to my doorstep that were interested in what I was doing because they were doing some work in Finland that seemed to be related to what I was doing, and they were trying to figure out some things. And there was a man named Eeyore Bach. Has anybody heard of Eeyore Bach? You have? Anybody else heard of Eeyore Bach? He was one of the last, according to the story, there were 12 Bach brothers. They were from Finland. And that this family of these 12 males, that Hitler did everything in his power to kill them. There was this whole story around how he had this hit squad that went around just looking, doing everything they could to kill these 12 men. And they got 11 of them. He killed 11 of them. He didn't get Eeyore. And according to their family history, he wouldn't get Eeyore. And when Eeyore became the last one, that the female aspect of their family was to come to them, to come to Eeyore and tell him some things that he didn't know, and which was the history of the Earth, going back the same number of years that Thoth says we went back, 500 million years, saying that that's when we all began, was 500 million years ago. Not us. We started a couple 100,000 years ago. I mean, other civilizations, other consciousnesses. And the method that these two women, that there were only two, his grandmother and someone else, the method that they were to remember what the history of the Earth was through a geometrical pattern, which was this. And what they did was this pattern, was they ratcheted the pattern. Now, in sacred geometry, ratcheting means, imagine if there was two of those patterns superimposed over each other right now. One right over the top of the other one. And one of them you bring fixed, and the other one you could turn. So you know, like a ratcheting, you go, so you move something a certain number of degrees or so. Well, you were going to move this, the second circle, from here over to here. And when you do, you'd have 12 circles moving around there. So everybody see that? Well, if you had 6 here and they're fixed, and you got another set of these, and you took another set and superimposed over top of this one, but where the center of this one would be here, then you'd have another circle here and another circle here, and you'd have 12 circles moving around it. It would look like this. And so here, there's 12 of these circles moving around here. Now, what these two women did is they connected all possible lines that come out of these 12 circles. You can see how this main line, these radial lines coming in that they drew, they did those all over, and then they connected all possible lines together, creating this intricate pattern in the center between the creation, the Genesis pattern that had been ratcheted. They say that all languages are contained in those lines, the actual letters of all languages. This is what they said. Now, I just sat there listening to this stuff. I didn't know. You know, I had about 30 people in my room, and they had TV cameras and all this stuff going on. And I didn't know what they were talking about, really, at the first part. he said that they then ratcheted it one more time, so they got 24 circles. And when you do, you get this super intricate pattern inside the middle, like this. And that inside here were all the languages written in here. And he tried to make a simple pattern to show me what I was talking about, like this. This is it. He made this while they brought this in. They had been creating it on the airplane and everything as they were coming over. And here, this is English in here. So you see the letter A and W and V and you know, all the various letters of the English alphabet he was starting to put in there, around there. And I looked at this in my mind. I'm going, oh, come on, you can put any old language in there. You know, there's so many lines in here. You could, you know, it'd be easy to draw anything in there. And so, but I'm sitting there real straight, going, yeah, okay. And so, but he was doing it with this more intricate pattern, like this one. And according to him, again, they're just repeating what they saw, and you'll understand why they got so excited in just a moment. According to the Eeyore, the lines that were arranged in here, once you put the letters in there, the line that would come off of one of them would form what's called a transcendental pattern. A transcendental number in mathematics is a number that has no end. A good example of that is the phi ratio. We're going to be talking about the phi ratio, so I'll use that one. Phi is a Greek symbol phi, which is spelled P-H-I, and it's a number that is 1.6180339, and it goes to infinity. And there is no end. If you put a computer in it, the computer can't find an end, no matter how long the computer runs, or how many computer chips there are in there, and they've done it on this number. And it'll never repeat itself. You never know what the next number is going to be. It could be anything. You never have any idea whatsoever. There's no pattern. There's no way to determine what the next number is going to be. It's a number from another dimensional level. That probably is a whole number up there, but in here, it won't work. It just simply doesn't fit into this world. And so this is called a transcendental pattern, meaning that once you come off of a line off of one letter, it'll come down to another letter. And then the reflection from there will go up to another letter, but you never know where the reflection is going to go. And what they said is that you start with A, and it'll start making these letters, which will form words, which will form sentences, which will tell you the history of the Earth, going back, starting from the beginning, 500 million years ago, step by step by step by step, all the way through everything that happened, all the different cultures for 500 million years. It's pretty outrageous. I don't know if it's true or not, but that's what they told me. And in this story, as it unfolded, toward the end, which I assume that when they started talking about Lemuria and Atlantis, they're probably in the last couple. It took 20 years for these 2 hours a day for 20 years for these two women to tell Eeyore the whole story, to read the whole thing and tell the whole story. So if it took 20 years and they're going 500 million years, then probably it was the last week or something that they talked about Lemuria and Atlantis. And it would have been toward the very, very end of all this. And but in the story, after they got done with the history, then the story started talking about Eeyore himself, because he was supposedly a king of the earth, according to this thing, and that his fathers and fathers and fathers went back for kings that had gone back all the way since the very, very beginning. They were hidden kings on the earth, according to him. And that they had a temple in Finland. And so he was told, I mean, this sounds like science fiction, except that I saw it on video. Watched the whole thing. It was so, if they hadn't brought the videos, I think I'd have kicked them out. According to this story, he was to go to this particular mountain and to dig in this particular spot. And before he ever did, they went and got a permit to do this, archaeological permit and everything else like that. Did the whole thing legally through it. They got the whole stuff. And they went to the spot, and they started digging. And they got the TV's cameras on it, and I sat there for 6 hours, man, watching just about every shovelful. It was 30 days, but they condensed 30 days into 6 hours, and I felt like it was about 2 months. Because, I mean, they went, and there's about 30 or 40 of them doing this digging. And what they told them is that they would dig down a certain number of feet and they would find a granite slab. The granite slab would weigh 200 or 300 tons, would be approximately from here to the wall in length, about, I think it was about 6 or 7 feet wide and about this deep, polished like a mirror. They would find this granite slab in there. And underneath that granite slab would be about 6 inches of red clay, and the people from Hollywood analyzed the clay. The clay doesn't even exist in Finland. And then underneath that there would be this granite slab like this, and then this red clay, should use red, and then another granite slab, and then this red clay in here, and then another granite slab, these huge, enormous slabs, and then another thing of red clay, and then another granite slab, and then more red clay, and then another granite slab, and then more red clay, and then another granite slab. 6 of them. It's like the creative thing of the I Ching. 6 straight lines. And this was about 6 or 7 feet under the earth. It wasn't that far. And so these guys dig down, so here it is. And they clear the whole thing out, and you can see it. It's this big, huge piece of granite. Only these guys are, they're all Finnish hippies, you know. They're not archaeologists, and they're going, well, how are we going to get this out of here? I don't know. They couldn't lift it. I mean, it would, you know, you couldn't, I mean, even a crane. I mean, how are you going to lift 200 or 300 tons, you know? And so they decided to blow it up. And that's what they did. I watched them on the thing. They stuck dynamite on this thing, and they blew it all to bits. And they carried the pieces out, and they blew the next one up, and they blew the next one up, and they blew the next one up, and they just blasted their way through this thing. Couldn't believe they were doing this. And then, according to the story, after they got through this, then there would be, the mountain would be carved out by hand underneath there, because they were right at the base of this mountain. And there would be a carving out, and it would go into a wedge like this. And you could see they cleared out all this stuff going all the way down. It's like 40, 50 feet going down into this mountain. And here was this perfect wedge with all this sacred geometry etched into the walls. That's the part I was going, look at that stuff, man. And going all the way down, and at the bottom they would come to this door. They told me in advance, before they even started digging, this is what the story was. And they got down to the bottom, and here was this false door that had been carved into the side of the mountain. It looked like a door, but it was just a false door carved into it. They were then told that on the other side it was hollow, and there was a passageway. The passageway would go down, and then it would curve up, and then curve to the left, and then begin a vortex going like this, deep into the earth. I believe what they said, 10 miles into the earth, with 15 million rooms off of this hallway. I mean, you know, that's pretty outrageous, no matter how you look at it. But that's what they said. And that the first 200 or 300 of these rooms would have a gold, full-size life statue of the kings that Bach represented. His fathers, going all the way down there. And in there were all these treasures associated with each one of these different kings. And then underneath that were rooms that were associated for other people. I don't know what this all was. And so I watched all this stuff, and they got down to the room, and he's drilling this. You see one of these jackhammers going like this in this door. It's supposed to be hollow on the other side. And he goes like this. He goes pop through like this. You know, the guy almost falls over like this, and he pulls the thing out. And then they said, well, what do we do now? And at that moment, according to the story, as soon as they popped through and made the hole that it was hollow, the Newer was to go to India for 6 months and to study with somebody. And so I had got them after they just popped through. Eeyore was still in India, and they're in my room showing me these videos about this thing. And so they're going, well, what do you think? I don't know. I mean, all I could say was that this was a sacred pattern, but I didn't know. I didn't know. So they promised me that as soon as Eeyore went in there, they were going to go over there and film the whole thing, and they would let me know what happened. 6 months went by, and not a word. A long time went by, and I finally called one of these guys up, and I said, hey, whatever happened on that? And he goes, we don't know. He won't let us. Eeyore went in, and then dead silence. Wouldn't let anybody film it, wouldn't let anybody come over, wouldn't let anybody see anything. They won't talk about it anymore, nothing. He says, that's it. And so I don't know what's happened on that. So I took this and put it, I have this big file of weird things. Put it in my weird thing file and filed it in there with all this stuff that somehow is attracted to me all the time. I don't know how I get it. And put it in there, and I figured, well, maybe someday it'll make sense. But I don't know. But in terms of language being in there, that was the first time I'd ever heard that language was associated with this. But I didn't believe it, and I didn't know what to think about it. Then sometime later, a couple of years went by, and a man named Dan Winter came to my house, and we sat down and had a good time talking about sacred. He's another guy involved in sacred geometry up in New York, and he's done a lot of real interesting things with sacred geometry that are really pretty good. And he's a good guy. He's really trying to solve a lot of the world's problems.
The universe is comprised of a single, contiguous, folded surface. And when a disturbance or perturbation strikes that medium, there is a natural tendency for toroidal donut-like shapes to occur folded in that space. The torus donut is self-standing because it folds as wave and stores inertia in 3 kinds of spin at once: X, Y, and Z axis spin. So this way of self-conserving inertia in toroidal donut forms is the way the beginning of the universe occurred. So we can attempt to record and describe mathematically what happens when a drop touches the folded surface. This is actually a 3D map of a sine wave, animated mathematically, but we can see that this folded surface is constantly recording the shape of the wave that's being permitted to stand on it. And note how you get this dimpling donut spiral kind of foldedness that constantly records shape. And if the universe is a unified field and compressible medium, shape is really the only thing that we have to remember. Shape has to record all of the forms we call matter. These toroidal donut-shaped domains or field effects, as they're called, nest concentrically, even fractally, and the way they embed one inside each other is a clue for how the beginning of things that we call atoms occurred from the long wave of the shapes of pressure eddies that spanned galaxies wide. These waves use the universal language of pressure, storing inertial momentum, to remember the language of shape. And shape is everything we have to remember, because in a unified field, only shape is stored to remember. Later we'll look at how the heart muscle itself is layered according to these viewpoints of spin symmetry, and how emotion and events in the body are following the same wave language. But first, we'll look at the actual creation of the atomic table from the wave shape of these domain donuts. This is 3 donuts spinning at 90 degrees to each other, nesting into what we'll eventually see is actually the creation of the shape of the cube, which is three perpendicular, you might think of them as orbitals. We'll have a chemical meaning later when we think of the pi suborbital. Here we're going to actually begin to create the shape of the cube. Here's another view of those three vortex light cone domains. As they tilt into the cubic array, three perpendicular domains can phase lock, and this symmetry among domains is later what we're going to call quantum theory. It's important to remember that what our cookbook to chemistry is the memory of how to tilt these nifty little donut domain doohickeys. The simplest possible arrangement of faces to make a platonic solid is called the tetrahedron. It's called this because it has four faces. If we see that the simplest possible arrangement of light cones here is four vortex faces with tetrahedron. So four pairs of them will make the next view, which is the octahedron. Four individual light cones make the tetrahedron. We'll later see that the viewpoints of the tetrahedron have more symmetry or more mirror spin axes than any of the other platonic solids. And later we'll be able to build more beautiful and complex platonic symmetry arrays. This is based on the dodecahedron. This is 6 pair or 12 light cones nested in the arrangement of the dodecahedron. Notice the beautiful pentagonal flowering symmetry shape. So again, let's remember the simple shape of two of these donuts nested together spinning. Notice the geometry in the center there, created because the two of them are spinning and they're phase locked. They're nested. See the outline of the square there? The cube is implied. You see another view of that. And this is the same form. We've just added the third donut. So now it's spinning on the z-axis, the x-axis, and the y-axis. There's a beautiful cube in there. 3 spinning donuts. Note how the simple sine wave, when we spin it around, actually makes the donut. So actually the cross-section of the symbol for the Tao is really built on the sine wave. And then we can take the same embedded nesting of the long wave on the short wave of sine waves to make electron shells and orbitals and eventually braid them into the 3D forms that we know of as membranes and objects. We braid those nested embedded waveforms into symmetry space and we can make a sphere. It's really necessary for the universe to invent ways for sine waves to nest before she can create 3D balloons and membranes and bubbles, things that have surface. And remember, all of this was done by simply remembering how to spin a donut in 3 dimensions or 3 axes of spin. So this prepare the field effect, the domain that we have to do with our attention boils down to this issue of remembering how to spin the donuts. So the number of dimensions is the number of spins that are superposed. The only sense in which dimension has any meaning is this superposition or concentricity of axes of spin or rotation. So what we've been calling dimension has really been the ability of wave donut vortex fields to be superposed. This is important because now we're going to get the sense of if we want to live in more than one dimension at once with respect to our attention or awareness or consciousness, we must be able to focus or phase lock or cohere with these field effects. And this is what happens with emotion in the body, which is we'll look more at in a little while. Concentric lines of force even apply to the way in which the planet maintains its electrical and its phase lock to its gravitational fields. So the way in which populations interact with these field effects help determine whether the planet is stable, even tectonically. By tracing the path down 2 light cones, we've actually put 10 spirals of the golden mean on that light cone and traced a beautiful series of overlays suggesting how organic shapes occur when these field effects occur in light cones. It's fun to play with. And then they reach center. This is another animation similar to the one that we started with, showing the relationships of 4 light cones nested and spinning. So this spiral of golden mean, if we see it from above, going down a cone and then rotated to the side, begins to look like the tongue of a serpent there. Hence the term serpent power. And later we're going to revolve this form into something we call the Grail cup. This is reminiscent of how it is that we get this recursion from a large world into the small, idealized by this golden mean spiral. So we can take this spiral now. This is one spiral seen from 4 views. The top left is a top view, and then to the right we have 2 side view. Bottom left is another side view, and bottom right is an oblique view. And then we begin to revolve this spiral, and we get a cup shape. And this cup is infinitely recursive. We could zoom into it. First, let's turn it around to see the different viewpoints of the cup.
There are 7 regions that will map onto perfectly. Just as there are 7 spheres that will fit together into that thing, there are 7 regions that map perfectly onto this, and they just gave them 7 different colors. It's called a 7-color map that was on there. If you really want to understand that, I suggest you get a mathematical book and read all the thesis of it. It's from Arthur Young. That's who it is. They've mapped other maps onto these now. And these 7 regions are associated with the heart. The heart has 7 regions and 7 muscles, and they move according to this. There's a direct association with the 7 regions of the tube torus and the heart, the human heart. Yes, Dan Winters.
A question about
I'll get you next.
About our origins. It's not directly about this, but it is something that we covered that I feel would be useful to have explained just a little bit further. And that is that I understand that the Anunnakis created the slave race. We had the Hebrews and we had the Martians come to this earth. Was there such a thing as original Earthlings, and where are they in the scheme of things today?
The image that Sloth gave to me was that the Earth has been like a womb for many, many, many different races and consciousnesses of beings that have come here. Different kinds of lots of real different kinds of consciousness, going back 500 million years. And these races go through these 5 stages, and then they leave. They completely leave the whole octave. They go do something totally different than be where there's planets and this kind of beingness. And
They leave through ascension?
Well, ascension, as we know, ascension is going from one level to another level. Now, the final phase is beyond ascension. It's actually going on to another way of being. When you reach the 55-foot level and you become that perfection, then at that point there is something that we are capable of doing that we can't really talk about at this level. It's something beyond all of this. We go beyond it. So the Earth becomes like a breeding ground of these to create these races that go on to this other place. And the slave race, maybe we're initially started that way, but we came out of that when Adam and Eve broke away from that. They set us aside. The slave race kept going, and they set us aside to grow on our own. And at one point, they just stopped all of that, and they all died because they couldn't procreate. So the slave race basically died out, and this new aspect of it with Adam and Eve is what we are. That's where we came from.
And the original Earthlings, are they separate from or intermingled, or?
You mean the original ones, meaning from the Adam and Eve?
No. Before that, when the Anunnaki came here, were there inhabitants upon this earth that we might consider to be original Earthlings? I know you said your first wife was from Earth, and I didn't know what. When I say someone is from Earth, I mean they have been in this evolutionary cycle for a long time. But this evolutionary cycle only goes back 200,000 years, a little longer than that. If you want to stretch it back to what Sumerians say, 250,000 years. But no matter how you look at it, it's 250,000 years, somewhere around in there. And so there's nothing. I don't see there being any such thing as an original Earthling. Everybody has come from somewhere else. And ultimately, we all came from outside of the system. And at that point, we were just one being, one spirit. There was just one. And we came in and diffracted into this place. And we've diffracted, and we've diffracted, and we've diffracted, and we've diffracted. Further and further down. And this is about as far down as you can go in the diffraction. But I don't really. If you were to look at these diffractions where they came from, we've all come from different places. If you want to say where we came from, but even when you get to that place, you say, "Well, I came from Sirius." Well, you get to Sirius, you find the diffraction that you weren't really from Sirius, because you track it further enough down from there, you've come from somewhere else. And if you keep following that back, you'll keep going. And if you go back up the diffraction rate, you'll keep coming back until you come to this place where you've gone where you go outside of it, outside of the system. This whole waveform universe is something that was created from a sphere by one person, one spirit, whose name was Metatron. This is my belief. And he sat in this circle with these particular beings and conceived of the idea of a sphere from which everything else was created through. And this is an experiment. We live in an experiment. It's just it's a test case. See how it would work. And it's not complete. We don't know what the end result is yet. We're not all the way through it. We're like a rose that is just a little bud that is still opening, and it hasn't actually formed a rose, and we're not sure what it's really going to look like. Now, there are places that there are ways of being that spirit can inhabit that are completely different than this. There's no words, there's no images, there's no nothing that could transmit that. There's nothing in this system that could transmit the kinds of things that would be outside the system. But and this is what we eventually get to. We come out as one spirit, we come into this whole thing, we come down and we live it, because that's the only way you can find out what it is. And then once we get down in here and we mingle all that in here, then we start returning back, coming back through all this, which
it's a joining process rather than that. You keep coming back up to higher and higher levels with larger bodies of single consciousness until you finally come to these planes where there's this single consciousness that's everywhere, and then the decision is made whether or not you remain there or if you go back outside the system again and return into the original source. This is the image that I have held for a pretty long time, about 10 billion years, and that's how I've seen it. Though if you got a better way, I'll look at it. And but I guess that's about all I'd say on it. But nobody's from anywhere. And all this, even these different places, are just illusion. There's no all this stuff. I mean, when I say illusion, I mean it doesn't exist. There's no solidness here. There's no table here. It's just space, and it's just movement. It's all based on just movement. It's just we can break it down to. Our mind gives us solidity. Our mind gives the temperature of things. We're our sensing all of our sensing devices, but it's not real.
And yet, it's important to know where we came from in order to combine with where we are to know where we're going.
Well, we're talking about in a contracted, small amount of time and space, and this is important for us here and now under these conditions, for us to do this. That may not be true under different conditions. In polarity consciousness, where our consciousness is broken into threeness, that's necessary. A little bit further down the line, that would not even make any sense. Okay.
Getting back to the tube torus.
Thank you.
Where does the name come from? Why is it called
tube?
A tube
Is like an inner tube.
Right.
And a torus is a particular mathematical shape that does this. There is no other shape that will fold in on itself like this. The torus, the magnetic field that comes back through and comes like that whole thing, like the apple type shape, that's a torus. And a tube torus is one that's in the shape of a tube. Okay. Is there any more shapes about the alphabet in this? Yeah. Any more shapes? Any more questions?
Is the human auric field in its full growth, isn't it the exact shape of the tube torus?
Not exactly, but it is a torus. We have a north and a south pole, and we have a field that wraps around and comes back right through the center, not like this. So we are a torus. In fact, you'll see this on the screen in a little while. We may have a tube in there somewhere. I'm not real sure. I don't think so. I think we're more an actual torus other than a tube torus. Okay. Now here is the next rotation. With the first rotation, we saw this little guy pop out. Now the next one is that you go to the innermost places. So the gold one is the 6 days of Genesis, and these are the innermost places. And so the rotation rotates on those spots and centers there and creates this pattern. So this is the second rotational pattern going around like that. And when you do that, you're now looking at another three-dimensional shape that you can hold in your hand. And it's a really super important one. It's the second shape of Genesis. But if you just, I remember when the angels told me exactly what I just told you, and I was going, really? And I said, what is it? And they just said, look at it. They wouldn't tell me. And I had to sit there. They always do that. They won't. They make me work all the time. And I sat there for 2 days, just, there's a shape in there? Looking at it and looking at it and looking at it. And finally, all of a sudden, it just went, boing, it just popped out at me. You go, wow. There it is. If you were to erase all the lines in the center one, and erase certain other lines. In fact, you erase all these black lines and also all the ones in the center. What pops out is this, which is an actual three-dimensional shape that I'll go back there one more time so you can kind of see where they are. That's it. And that is a three-dimensional view. I'll draw lines through it in here of a cube with a sphere on each corner. You can't see the eighth one, of course, because that's on the other side. And so this little funny little thing of 8 little spheres comes popping off the page on the second time around. This had a name, according to the ancients also, and they called it the egg of life. I didn't understand that term when they first gave it to me. It took me a while. Now it makes perfect sense, because it is the morphogenic structure of biology. It creates all the living life forms. It creates you, right down to the very shape of your eyes and everything else. It's the structure that forms bodies. And it is also the one that has to do with sound and light. It is interrelated with that, as we will clearly be able to show that organic structure and sound and light are interrelated. And this is the shape that ties them all together. And so for right now, I'm just going to introduce it. It is here, give a name, and put it down. And in a little bit we'll come back and I'll be able to show you what I mean by what this is. There's then another vortex, which you go one more time, you rotate around. This is the third rotation around the central Genesis pattern, or the central sphere, rather, of the Genesis pattern. And in this one, there's also another pattern here of 7 spheres. You see this one in the middle, and you see this one here, and this one here, and there's 7 spheres that are just touching each other. These just touch each other all the way around. Does everybody see that? Anybody not see it? Okay. That pattern is real special, but it requires something else in there for it to be clear. It took life a long time to understand this part of it, and when they did, life decided that the pattern that I'm about to show you was so sacred that they hid it. In almost all of the, it's never shown. And I don't even know where it ever is shown, except for here. It usually isn't shown. The flower of life up here, this is the outer limits of the flower of life. What they do right now all over the world is they encircle this with 2 circles, complete it to this image. So if you notice, there's 7 circles in this one that just fit around there. Does everybody see that? Does everybody not see it? Except in this one, they completed a whole lot, all the pattern all the way through it. And then they put this on the walls all over the world. In fact, it's all over the universe, not just here. Why did they stop right here and not go on? Why did they, in all over the world, there's these 19 circles, and because this could be an infinite pattern. What was it about this thing that they were trying to hide? Well, the reason they put it right here and stopped at this place was because of this sacred form that I'm talking about that they didn't want you to see, but they wanted you to know it was there. And so this was the secret. And the secret is, to get to the sacred form is you complete the circles. You see how there's a piece of one here, and here's another bigger piece, and here's there's 3 little tiny pieces of circles. You put your compass so that one would go around like that. Here's another piece of a circle completed. Complete all the circles that are shown on this pattern. And look to see what the next vortex is. The very, very next vortex. Here's the flower of life image. There's the 7 circles, this touching, and this is the limit. Here in pencil, you'll see all those circles that were completed. All these lines were completed. Does everybody understand what I'm saying? Okay. The next rotational pattern is the innermost points, which are there, 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 and there. And so I drew the circles on there. And so if you just complete the circles of here, make the very next rotation, and what you get is this pattern of 13 circles. It looks like this. So if you extract that out, you get this. And it's another one of those so what kind of things, you know. I mean, it's so simple. Who cares, you know? What difference does it make? Well, I mean, to the ancients, this was like blinding light, almost. There was so much knowledge there that it was just hard to imagine that one form could hold so much knowledge. It was given the name the fruit of life. Remember that we had the flower and the seed and the tree, and I never talked about the fruit. The fruit is what the whole tree kind of is for, right? To create the fruit in a way. And it's the part that gives nourishment. It's the part that is the completion of the reason for everything. Well, hidden in this image, there are 13 systems of knowledge that delineate very carefully all the fine points of the entire reality. It really, real good. In every little tiny detail, all the details. And I'm only going to show you 4 of the systems, though there are 9 more. But by the time I get done with 4 of them, I think you'll be able to see the point. And all it is, this is all female energy on the page here. There are 13 ways that male energy can be superimposed over this. Each one of them produces this vast, huge, massive library of information. And so I'm going to begin by showing the first system, the simplest one, the easiest one, and the one that I screwed up on, I just realized recently. I didn't see something. This is going to be kind of funny, you guys, in a minute. But the simplest one is just simply to connect the centers. Right? Like this center could be connected by 3 lines. Connect them all. This one over here, it takes 7 lines, and this one out here, I think it's 10. No, this one takes 10, and this one takes 7 to connect to all the other ones. But this is what I mean. So that you connect this center to that one, and this center to that one, and this center to this one, etc., all the way through here. So you connect them all together. And this is called, throughout the universe, Metatron's cube. It's one of the initial steps of creation. The whole image, the whole thing is called Metatron's cube. This is one of the first things that I received from the angels, and I did it wrong. And they never told me. And for 20-something years, I just found out about 2 weeks ago, something I've been looking for 20-something years. I was looking for something, and I couldn't figure out why. And I just got the answer. I'm so happy. I'll tell you the answer in just a minute, but I want to show you the first 4. There's 5 shapes.